Um, if you really look at how human beings evolved, there's this incredible biological expectation of movement, right? And of consequence.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, survival literally meant running, reacting, doing.
Right. Early humans, they learned to hunt by actually hunting. They learned to navigate by getting lost and, having to find their way back before the sun went down.
The stakes were completely visceral. The feedback was immediate. If you made a mistake, you felt it right then and there.
Exactly. But we've somehow managed to completely invert that. Like, we've traded the wild savanna for a hard plastic chair in a lecture hall.
Yeah, it is a bit of a leap, isn't it?
It really is. We ask our brains to just sit perfectly still, stare at a screen, and absorb abstract reality without any physical consequence at all. And the result is, well, chronic boredom and burnout.
Which brings us to the focus of today's deep dive. We're looking at a really fascinating 2005 journal article. This is from the Academy of Management Learning and Education.
Right, and it explores this concept called service learning, which aims to fundamentally change the way you absorb information and interact with the world around you.
Yeah, and the strength of this particular article is that it doesn't just rely on academic theory. It features extensive interviews with three leading thinkers from completely different professional arenas.
Which is so refreshing. It's not just professors talking to professors.
Exactly. We hear from Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, the renowned psychologist who theorized the concept of flow.
Such a huge concept.
Right. Then there is Bernard Milano, who's a corporate foundation leader coming straight from the executive ranks of KPMG. And finally, John Saltmarsh, a historian and a leading service learning educator.
So our mission today is to synthesize these three distinct perspectives. We want to see how stepping out of the classroom and trying to solve messy, real-world community problems actually transforms the human brain.
It's really an argument for taking education off the passive industrial assembly line, right, and turning it into a dynamic engine for deep understanding.
Yeah. So whether you are a student right now, a manager leading a team, or just someone who fundamentally loves to learn, this deep dive is going to challenge some basic assumptions about how true mastery is actually achieved.
For sure. But to really grasp the mechanics of what these authors are proposing, we have to start by diagnosing the biological failure of traditional education.
Okay, let's unpack this, because it really comes down to biology, doesn't it? I mean, I like to think of the traditional college experience, sitting in an amphitheater with 500 or 600 freshmen just staring at a screen. It's like trying to learn to swim by watching a PowerPoint.
That is a perfect analogy. You can't do it. And Csikszentmihalyi makes a really compelling case that our modern educational model is basically an evolutionary mismatch.
It fights our biology.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Historically, children learned alongside adults. They took on real responsibilities that made a tangible difference to their family or their tribe.
Right. If you messed up in that context, the shelter fell down or the fire went out, you didn't just get a C- on a piece of paper. You felt the immediate physical consequence of your failure.
Yeah, and about 150 years ago, society built an educational system based on this new assumption that teaching should involve sitting patiently and comprehending abstract concepts.
Which is just wild when you think about human history.
It is, and Csikszentmihalyi points out the psychological toll of this shift. I mean, he argues that modern college students rarely face any actual accountability for the real-world results of their actions.
None at all.
Right. He actually characterizes this reality as downright scary. You have hundreds of students in a massive lecture hall with virtually no human contact, no sense that their individual decisions matter in a complex environment.
And that lack of accountability breeds passivity, which is, the absolute enemy of engagement. And engagement is central to what Csikszentmihalyi is most famous for studying, right? The concept of flow.
Yes, flow. That state of optimal experience where you are so absorbed in an activity that time just seems to disappear. You are at your absolute peak of focus.
I think everyone has felt that at least once, where you just lose track of everything else.
Oh, definitely. But what's fascinating here is that flow isn't just a random occurrence. According to his research, it requires three very specific parameters to trigger that neurological state.
Okay, what are they?
First, the brain needs clear goals. Second, it requires immediate feedback. And third, there must be a delicate balance between the challenge of the situation and your capacity or skill level to meet it.
Wow. Okay. Well, a traditional classroom fails almost all of those parameters. I mean, the goal is usually just passing a test at the end of the semester. That's so far away.
Yeah, there's no immediacy.
Right. The feedback is delayed by weeks while a professor grades a paper, and the challenge is entirely abstract. It exists only in theory. But service learning, according to the article, forcefully ejects students from that passive comfort zone.
It does. Csikszentmihalyi frames learning in three distinct stages. First, you accumulate knowledge. Second, you accumulate skills. And the third stage is applying those skills.
And traditional classrooms often skip that third stage entirely.
Exactly. They just leave it out. Service learning is designed to force that application phase.
Yeah.
By throwing a student into a complex, unpredictable community project, the feedback isn't a red pen on an essay.
Right. The feedback is seeing whether the project actually functions in reality.
Yes. The complexity of reality spikes the challenge level, which forces the brain to elevate its skill level to match. And that is exactly how you trigger flow.
Okay, but if the human brain requires that level of immediate high-stakes feedback to truly learn, you run into a practical problem. How do you actually engineer that kind of environment? You can't just, drop a group of college sophomores into a wilderness survival situation.
No, you definitely can't do that. And this is where the practical application of the theory really comes into play, specifically looking at how the corporate world addresses this gap. Bernard Milano provides the perspective of an organization that hires thousands of young adults every year at KPMG.
Now, here's where it gets really interesting. Because you're telling me a massive global accounting firm like KPMG is pushing community service purely for the sake of employee self-actualization.
That's what Milano's saying, yeah.
I mean, I have a hard time believing that isn't just a cynical PR move,
Yeah.
Let's slap the corporate logo on a charity event for brand enhancement.
Right. And Milano actually addresses that exact skepticism in the interview. He clarifies that at KPMG, their community involvement programs are not run out of public affairs. They're not marketing.
Oh, really?
No, they are entirely managed by human resources.
Okay, operating out of HR suggests it's an internal strategy, not an external marketing campaign.
Exactly. According to Milano, these programs are completely disconnected from client development. They are a direct response to the psychological needs of their workforce.
Because they're hiring all these young people.
Right. They hire thousands of Gen Xers. And Milano notes this applies even more to subsequent generations who arrive with a deeply ingrained desire to give back. They require a level of personal fulfillment and a sense of making a societal difference that they simply cannot.
That they can't get from auditing spreadsheets all day.
Exactly. They just can't get it from their day job.
So if a manager ignores that inherent drive, the employee just becomes unfulfilled and eventually quits. So KPMG basically views service learning as a retention tool. It develops a more engaged, complete person rather than just a technical accountant.
That's it, exactly. And the article highlights a specific initiative that illustrates this perfectly. Milano discusses an organization called Students in Free Enterprise, or SIFE, and a project they run called Town for a Day.
Oh, I read about this. It's a brilliant case study in moving from abstract knowledge to real-world application.
The mechanics of it are so fascinating.
They really are. You take a group of college business students, and instead of having them take a written exam on macroeconomics, you send them into an elementary school gymnasium.
Yeah, and their task is to physically build a miniature town. They have to set up a post office, a mayor's office, little retail shops.
And then the elementary school kids come in, run elections, take on civic roles, and learn about pricing, buying, and selling.
Right, so the 8-year-olds are learning the basics of cash flow and supply and demand. But the deepest cognitive work is actually happening in the brains of the college students.
Because suddenly, abstract business theory is colliding with the chaos of reality. The college students are the ones truly being tested here because they have to apply their knowledge by figuring out how to teach it to a child.
Yes, they have to adapt to the unpredictable dynamics of a noisy gymnasium.
Right, they have to pivot immediately when a kid doesn't understand a concept or, when the fake economy starts to crash.
Exactly. Yeah. And that environment hits all of csikszentmihalyi's parameters for flow. The feedback is instantaneous. The challenge of managing a live, unpredictable scenario requires high-level teamwork, adaptability, and communication skills.
A multiple choice test simply cannot replicate that cognitive load.
It really can't.
So seeing the practical benefits of sending students into a gymnasium to run a mini economy makes total sense. But structurally, universities already do something very similar. Every college in the country pushes internships and co-op programs to get students out of the classroom.
That's true, they do.
So what does this all mean? What is the fundamental difference between an internship and a service learning course? Aren't they both just working in the real world?
Well, John Saltmarsh addresses that specific distinction, and he argues the difference is not just logistical. He actually calls it an epistemological shift.
Epistemological? Wow, that's a heavy academic term concerning how we know what we know, right?
It is a big word, yeah. But we connect this to the bigger picture. Let's break down the traditional internship model.
Mm.
A student sits in a classroom, accumulates a body of abstract knowledge, and then goes out into the corporate world to apply it.
Okay.
The flow of information is a one-way street. Furthermore, the primary goal of that internship is individual career advancement. The student is trying to build a personal resume to secure future employment.
So you memorize the theory, you endure the internship to get a job, and the transaction is essentially complete.
Right. But service learning, Saltmarsh explains, relies on a completely different mechanism, the action-reflection loop.
The action reflection loop.
Yes. Students take those abstract concepts and test them in the community, much like an internship. But the critical difference is that they must bring those messy, complicated real-world experiences back into the classroom for rigorous analysis.
I like to think of it like forging a sword. The classroom is where you gather the raw iron, the abstract knowledge. Going out into the community and attempting to solve a problem with it is the heat and the hammer, shaping the metal.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Right. But the reflection, bringing that chaotic experience back to the classroom to analyze what worked and what failed, that is the water quenching the steel. It locks the strength into place. Without that final reflective step, the knowledge stays soft.
I love that analogy. That reflection process forces cognitive processing. It links the chaotic sensory experience of the real world back to the academic theory.
Which is where the real learning happens.
Exactly. And Saltmarsh points out that the purpose of this work isn't just personal career advancement, it is focused on addressing larger issues of the common good. He actually prefers the term community-based problem solving over service learning for this exact reason.
Because when a student engages in that action reflection loop, like, say, testing theories on a failing local food bank supply chain, and then bringing that data back to analyze it, a massive psychological shift happens.
It really does. Saltmarsh describes it as transitioning from being a passive consumer of knowledge into an active co-creator of knowledge.
Wow. Consumer to co-create.
Yeah. Sitting in a lecture hall makes you a spectator.
Yeah.
You are simply consuming facts that someone else generated. When you are out in the field generating new data and analyzing it, you are literally creating new knowledge.
Which feels so much more empowering.
Absolutely. And according to the researchers in this article, this shift from consumer to co-creator isn't just an innovative teaching technique. Saltmarsh argues it is an urgent requirement to solve a massive national crisis.
A national crisis? That seems like a pretty dramatic escalation from a discussion about college syllabi.
I know, it sounds intense, but this raises an important question. Saltmarsh points to a landmark 1998 report from the National Commission on Civic Renewal to illustrate his point. The report was titled, "A Nation of Spectators."
A nation of spectators. That perfectly mirrors the consumer of knowledge concept we were just talking about.
Oh, it really does. It detailed a profound crisis in the United States regarding civic participation and the deterioration of the social fabric.
It basically implies a society that just sits back and watches democracy happen or, watches it fall apart without intervening.
Exactly. And the commission analyzed schools, churches, and businesses, desperately looking for institutions that could solve this crisis of civic renewal. But what Saltmarsh found most alarming was that higher education was conspicuously absent from their list of potential solutions.
Wait, really? Higher ed wasn't even mentioned.
Not as a solution, no. The clear message of the report was that the university system was viewed as completely irrelevant to solving the nation's most pressing civic problems.
That is wild. I mean, the public perception was essentially that universities were merely extraction machines, just places for individuals to gain credentials and extract personal wealth, rather than institutions that actually build capable citizens.
Yeah, that was the takeaway. So Saltmarsh argues that service learning is higher education's mechanism to regain its relevance. It is a way to train students not just for private industry, but for public life.
That makes a lot of sense.
And we are actually seeing this philosophy drive real-world institutional change, even in highly technical, numbers-driven fields. The article points to the Engineering Accreditation Board as a prime example.
Right, ABET 2000. The national board that accredits engineering degrees completely rewrote their standards. They basically realized that in the 21st century, mathematical competence is no longer sufficient.
Exactly. They recognized that an engineer might be able to calculate the physics required to build a massive highway overpass. But if that engineer doesn't understand the social context of their work,
Right, like if they don't understand how that overpass will physically divide a neighborhood.
or impact local air quality, or disrupt community dynamics, then their technical skill is actually destructive.
Saltmarsh refers to this broader understanding as civic professionalism. It requires an ability to communicate the impact of technical work to the wider public and really navigate the social fallout of your designs.
Which is so crucial.
Mm.
But while the theory sounds incredibly beneficial for the students, Bernard Milano from KPMG introduces a critical caveat here. He warns about the sustainability problem.
Oh, okay, yeah, let's talk about that.
If universities are going to mandate that students go out and, quote unquote, help the community to fulfill these epistemological goals, it absolutely cannot be episodic.
Right, because a nonprofit organization is a functioning business. They have tight budgets, strict metrics, and very limited staff bandwidth.
Exactly.
The absolute last thing a busy nonprofit director needs is a 19-year-old college student dropping in for one afternoon, requiring 3 hours of basic training and supervision, taking a photo for their class presentation, and then disappearing forever.
Yeah, that dynamic actually creates the burden on the community. It drains the agency's resources instead of adding capacity. Milano insists that for service learning to be ethical and effective, there must be sustainable, multi-semester relationships between the university and the agency.
The nonprofit needs to know they can rely on that support consistently, week after week, year after year. The professor has to build that ongoing reality into the structure of their syllabus rather than just using the community as a disposable laboratory for the students' enlightenment.
That's a great point. And Milano points out that there are national infrastructures designed to help make these connections efficient. Organizations like the Points of Light Foundation or resources like 1-800-VOLUNTEER, they operate networks to properly match a university's capacity with an agency's actual ongoing needs.
Because it has to be a reciprocal relationship.
It has to be. And if an institution can manage to build those sustainable partnerships, and if students genuinely engage in that action-reflection loop, the authors argue we arrive at a much higher goal. We return to Csikszentmihalyi, who outlines in his related work that the ultimate aim of this educational shift is to develop leaders with soul.
With soul, using the word soul in a corporate or academic context is highly unusual.
It is, but Csikszentmihalyi defines it really clearly. He says it's a deep awareness that business upholds an implicit social contract with the rest of society.
So it's the internalized understanding that you are not operating in this world solely to aggrandize yourself.
Right. A leader with soul recognizes their fundamental responsibility to others. He makes a powerful argument that a manager who only focuses on the bottom line, someone who is constantly taking action without ever pausing to reflect on the broader impact of those actions, is on a collision course with absolute burnout.
That makes so much sense. And service learning inherently builds the mental habit required to avoid that burnout. It forces you to take decisive action in the real world, but it mandates that you balance that chaotic action with quiet, structured reflection.
Exactly. It builds the cognitive muscles required for a sustainable, deeply engaged career.
So whether you are currently grinding through a degree program or you are a decade deep into your professional career, the core message synthesized from these three experts is quite clear. True learning, authentic mastery, and that highly sought-after psychological state of flow simply cannot happen if you remain a passive spectator.
You really cannot learn to navigate the immense complexities of the modern world by just sitting in a plastic chair and taking notes on abstract theories. The biological reality of the human brain requires you to take risks.
You have to actually do things.
Right. You have to apply your skills in messy, unpredictable environments where the consequences are real. And crucially, you have to balance that action with rigorous reflection to lock the learning into place.
Which brings us to a final thought for you to consider as we wrap up today's deep dive. It builds directly on John Saltmarsh's concept of the consumer versus the co-creator.
Yeah, this is the really important part to take away.
Take a hard look at your own daily life right now. Look at your career, your neighborhood, your industry. Are you operating simply as a passive consumer of your industry's norms? Are you just accepting the way things are because that's the metaphorical PowerPoint presentation you were handed when you took the job?
Or could you treat your current role as your own personal service learning project?
Exactly. Consider what would happen if you stepped up, took accountability for the messy reality around you, tested some new ideas, and committed to becoming a co-creator of a better organization or community.
The sources we explored today strongly suggest that real learning and real fulfillment require movement.
They do. It might be time to get up out of the amphitheater and start doing the visceral work.